Great. Now you should be able to see my desktop, which is basically my dashboard, my Fintel dashboard. And well, let me just first of all say, don't take any tickers that are on this page as an endorsement or a non-endorsement. I follow a lot of companies, and some of them are interesting to me, some of them are not interesting to me, but don't think that because I have something on my dashboard that it's a good purchase or it's a good investment or a bad investment. So just want to let you guys know that. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through kind of setting up your dashboard and setting up your kind of your follow lists and so forth, and then do a dive into some of the data that we have. If you have specific things that you want me to talk about, go ahead and bring them up in the chat, and I'll make sure to cover them whenever I get to them. And of course, if you have any questions, you go ahead and put them in the chat as well. Okay, so with that in mind, if you've signed up to Fintel, you should have a dashboard, something like this. If you were following companies or if you had some interest in companies before you signed up, we usually will capture them and bring them over and automatically sign you up for them or to follow them and add them to your dashboard. If you have a ticker that you want to follow, you can, at a very basic level, you can just put it in here. So if I want to follow QQQ, for example, I can put QQQ in, and here it is over here, the QQQ Power Shares Trust. Okay. If I want to delete something from my dashboard, I got to go to stock lists down here, which is kind of really where the core management of these tickers is. So these are all part of your stock list. A stock list is another term for a watch list. I can create multiple stock lists. Okay, I've done this. I've created 4, and I can create a new list by clicking here, and it'll create a new list. I can delete something from my stock list by clicking on the X here. So let's go to the follow list. Let's get rid of Alcoa. I'm gonna click on the X, and now it's gone. Let's get rid of SLVs, the silver ETF. Okay, I can also add something here if I want to add SLV back. There, so I can add this to the list. Okay, I'm not sure why it just gave me an error here, but let me just try this again. iShares, add to list. Okay, I'm not sure why I'm getting an error here, but this is how you typically do it. I can also, as I said, I can kind of reorganize these as necessary, and I can create these little lists. If I go back to my overview now, I can then filter my kind of dashboard on these lists. So this allows me some pretty great flexibility in being able to keep a lot of different companies on track and to be able to manage them and track them, a lot more easily. Also on the dashboard, if I go back to all here and I go down, I can see that I have news. So here's all the latest news for all these companies that are on the dashboard. I can see recent SEC filings for these companies. And it's not just SEC filings. We also have data from the UK as well. So here's a total voting rights filing for AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca, of course, is dual listed on multiple exchanges. And so we track Financial Conduct Authority listings here. 6Ks, important news. This is another AstraZeneca filing. Okay, I can keep going down here, and then we see the latest insider transactions. So I can see 2 hours ago there was Mark Pruzanski filed an insider form that talked about an award. Okay, and I can see other types of filings, sales. This is part of a 10b5-1 plan. I can go further down. I can see ownership transactions. So these are new filings that funds have updated their positions in these companies, and we can see that some of them have gone up and some of them have gone down, and so forth. And if I want to get more detail on any of these, I can click on See More, and it will take me to these other pages here. So basically, this is the overview. This overview provides like a small snapshot of each of these big pages. So here's the news here. If I wanted to see a full listing of all the news, I could go here. This will basically be a deep dive of all the recent news articles for those companies. Here's a deep dive of SEC filings for the portfolio companies. So really, this is kind of like an expanded deep view of the little cards that were on this page. Okay. Here's insiders. And then we have these institutions and ownership data here. So this is some other stuff that we can talk about a little bit later, but basically this shows you, you know, of all of the, let's see, the funds flow for ownership of all the companies that are in my portfolio. This provides you with kind of summary funds flow for those tickers. So Google happens to have 4,484 owners. That's 71 more than last quarter, for example. We can see that shares has gone down and so forth. So this basically will give you kind of like an overview of the funds flow into the tickers that are on your stock list. You can also follow institutions. So, for example, people like to follow hedge funds. Okay, and this basically will give you a list of the funds flow for the institutions that you're following. I'll tell you how to follow an institution a little bit later on, but basically, you know, a lot of people like to say, let me follow my 10 favorite hedge funds or 20 favorite hedge funds and so forth. And if you do that, then what this is going to do is it's going to show you the most popular stocks in those hedge funds portfolios and allow you to kind of see which ones are increasing or decreasing over time. Okay, questions so far? Okay, I'm going to keep going. We have alerts. So when you sign up for a, when you follow or add something to your stock list, we're going to go ahead and add it to your dashboard, but we're also going to add you to the alerts. And so this is basically email alerts. You can turn these on or off if you want, but basically the kinds of email alerts that we send out, and we send this out automatically. There's a curated list. If there's an 8K filing, which is a SEC filing, that means it's newsworthy. If there's a significant insider trade, if there's a new 13D activist investment filing, if there's a new position in a fund, then we'll send you a note. And so, you know, we send a lot of what we believe to be relevant email alerts. If you decide that you don't want those, you can turn it on and turn it off here as necessary. We also have global alerts. So I can come in here basically, and I can say, send me an alert for every S1 filing. An S1 filing is a registration statement that predates an IPO. I can say, send me an alert for every insider purchase that's more than $100,000. And I'll get an email alert for every insider trade that's over $100,000. I can say, give me an email alert for every merger prospectus and so forth. And so this is basically for people who want to track the broad market and want to be alerted for newsworthy events. You know, this is kind of how you do it. And if you have an alert that you want us to create, obviously let me know and we can add it. Okay. We have the ability to create a notebook. If you want to create a notebook, which is basically just a little notes for, you know, investing notes and so forth, you can put that in here. And we have some team spaces as well. So we'll talk more about team spaces, but basically the welcome group here is a welcome group where you can, you know, have a conversation with other people on the site. Okay, so let's move on and talk about some data here. Let's talk about, for lack of a better company, let's talk about AMC. Everybody likes AMC, right? So I clicked on AMC here and I'm on a stock page, basically. And this navigation bar down here takes you through all of the various data that you can get to for AMC. Here's a 3-month stock chart. I can do 1 month, I can do 5 years and so forth. I can do it just today's. I can go to a more advanced chart here, which will allow me to do some interesting technical analysis. Here's Keitner channels. I can add that here, and now I can see some interesting analysis on this in this page. I can go on to see the ownership data. So this is something that's a lot of people like. We have, an extensive database of ownership data. The ownership data comes from 13F filings and import filings. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through here. This is the number of shares that are held. You can see that the shares in AMC have really gone up quite a bit in the last few months. In fact, we have a quant model that we call the ownership accumulation score that looks at number of new owners and allocation, changes in allocation for owners, and basically ranks companies based on their accumulation. And, AMC is, at a 97 percentile. So this is basically a ranking from 0 to 100. It's number 157 out of 20,000 companies that we track, which is pretty significant, which means basically that a lot of institutions are acquiring and accumulating AMC, which is a good sign if you are bullish AMC. The institutional put call ratios, institutions have to disclose their options in these companies, and we track those options. We can't always track. We don't get the information on what the strike prices are, what the expiration dates are, but we know at a very basic level how many puts somebody might have and how many calls somebody might have. And so we basically build a put call ratio around that to see kind of like what is the overall institutional sentiment for a company. And then of course we have 13D and 13G filings. These are basically called beneficial ownership filings. The SEC says that anybody who acquires at least 5% of the company must file a 13D or a 13G. A 13D, D as in Delta, if a company, if a fund is going to participate in management or try to influence management, or a 13G, G as in golf, if the fund or the owner is a passive investor. And so you can see Wanda Entertainment was an active investor, but they divested most of it back in May. I think people who follow AMC knew about this. Dimensional Fund Advisors is a passive investor, and they also divested, and so forth and so on. And of course, we have the 13F and import filings here. These are periodic filings. The 13Fs and imports are basically quarterly. 13Fs are based on a calendar schedule. So Q1, Q2, Q3 calendar-wise. The 13Fs are based on a calendar schedule. The import filings are based on a fiscal quarter schedule. So they have to file, funds have to file 60 days after the end of their fiscal quarter, which basically means that we get a lot of import filings at the end of every month. Okay, so you see all these came in on 8/30. These are all import filings. And the 13Fs come in 45 days after the end of the fiscal quarter. So if you go back down here to 8/15, 8/16, you can see all these 13Fs that came in. These are all for the end of Q2. So they would have been dated June 30th here. See, you can see the 13Fs coming in on 8/16 for 45 days ago. Questions so far? We try to color code these so people can see if they're new. If it's a new position, then it's green. If somebody's divested, then it's red. And we can give you some information about, like what is the estimated average value of the shares. Let's take a look at the average share price for that quarter, total number of shares, percentage change in shares, percentage change in value. And then of course the allocation. So like how much of the funds value, what percentage of the total funds assets under management are allocated to this investment, and so forth. Okay. Let's keep going here. You can also see net long short value. This is something new that we've done. So we basically look at the equity value, which is going to be just, the ownership in underlying shares, the ownership in call options, and the ownership in put options. And then also, some in import filings, they have to disclose borrowed shares. This is something different than 13F filings. Funds actually have to file and disclose negative value. We don't see any negative positions here. Actually, maybe we do. Yeah, so there's a negative position here, which means this is a short position. So we take a look at this net long short value, and you can sort this, and you can find out that Simplex Trading has a 470 million net short position in AMC. And that's based on an equity value of 85 million, a call value of 249 million, and a put value of 805 million, which I think is pretty interesting. Okay. I don't think you can get this data in any other place. It's, obviously Bloomberg and so forth, but probably not any place that's available for consumers. Here we have a list of all the short sellers for AMC. This is basically, this negative shares means it's a short position, or we also have puts. Those are also short positions. We also have mutual funds and ETFs and so forth. So if you're trying to find a mutual fund that has a lot of shares, then this will be your way to find that. The Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Investor Shares. It's got 13 million shares, 13.9 million shares in AMC. Questions so far? Okay, so let's talk about short interest. Let's see. Everybody's talking about. Wait, let's go to the Short Squeeze Explorer, and we'll kind of start there. So, short interest is a big topic these days. We have we looked at short squeezes, right? We looked at the GameStop, the short squeeze from back in February. AMC had a squeeze, I think sometime in May. Support.com actually had a squeeze last week. We look at all these short squeezes, and we think about like the mechanisms of what happens and what is required to happen in order to have a short squeeze. And what we've done is we've built a scoring model that takes all of these factors and kind of rolls them into a single number, and then ranks all the companies based on their propensity relative to their peers, right? So we know that we have to have a high short interest over float. GameStop, I think, was around 20% when it squeezed last February. Wasn't much higher than that. It was around there. We know that there has to be an increase in volume. We also know that there has to be an increase in price. If there's a lot of people that are selling short and the price is going down, then that's a profitable trade. So it's not going to squeeze, right? They don't have to cover. But if the price is going up, then the trade is not profitable. Okay. So the price has to go up and the volume has to go up, because that means that the shares have to become more hard to borrow. And I'll tell you what that is. It's basically, if you don't know what a short squeeze is, short sellers borrow shares and then sell them immediately. And so they have a negative, they have a loan on their balance sheet. And that loan, as long as the share price is decreasing, that loan is not underwater. But if the share price goes up, the loan becomes harder and harder and harder for the lender, which is basically the broker, to allow them to have. And there's a loan to value number. If I have $1 million in my account and I've shorted $20,000, then that's obviously not that big of a deal. But if I've got $1 million in my account and I've shorted 900,000, and the share price is going in the wrong direction, and suddenly my loan value is over $1 million, then they're going to tell me, my broker is going to tell me that I have to cover those shares. Now, a lot of people think that people that short sellers have to cover every day or whatever, and this is not true. It's just absolutely not true. They don't have to cover the shares. Okay, they only have to cover if the broker tells them they have to cover, and that only happens if their loan to value or their loan to the ratio for that particular account is out of whack. And so the other thing that is important here is the borrow fee rate. The borrow fee rate is the interest rate that the borrower is paying to borrow those shares. So right now, for BBIG, the borrower fee rate is 83%. That's an annual percentage rate. So it's very expensive for them to borrow those shares. So the point here is that, you know, all of these things here, 27% short interest over float, volume momentum is really high. Let's go take a look at Vinco Ventures real quick, see what it's been doing. I'm going to go to the overview here and look at what it's been doing for the last month. So look at this run up here. So you had, I'm looking down here at the very bottom, you had very little volume, and all of a sudden you have a whole lot of volume right here this last week. Okay, so this is all kind of the precursors to a short squeeze. And that is why BBIG is at the top of the list right now. Okay, questions about this? We take all of these factors here and we roll them into a score that's ranks from basically 0 to 100. Days to cover is a metric that basically says if all of the short sellers had to buy back shares to cover their short positions, then how many days would it take them to be able to do that? And basically you figure this out by taking the total number of short shares that are listed, and you divide it by the volume, the average volume. So you could take a 3-month average volume, you could take a 5-day average volume, whatever. It used to be that days to cover was people considered that to be a predictor of short squeezes, but based on my experience of looking for the last year at short squeezes and what's been going on, it's actually not an indicator at all. I put it up here for completeness, but it's actually kind of a contra-indicator, because in order to have a short squeeze, you have to have increasing volume, okay? And when you have increasing volume, that days to cover goes down, okay? Days to cover, I went and looked at these companies, and days to cover is really high. It can be 5 or 6 or 10 days to cover on some companies, but those are companies that nobody has any interest in. They're thinly traded stocks, and supposedly, I guess you could trigger a short squeeze if everybody piled into them, but there's just not. It's because there's so little volume, and so all of the short squeezes, or all of the squeezes that we've had in the last year, all had kind of like very low days to cover, but hugely increasing volume and hugely increasing price, and a high short interest over float and a high borrow rate. So that's why we look at these 4 factors when generating the short squeeze score. Okay, questions? I'll keep going if I don't hear anything. So let's talk about how to read the short interest data. I'm going to go ahead and click on Vinco Ventures because it's at the top of our list. So I'm going to slide through here. Short interest over float it's a really important number, and there's a lot of different sites that publish this number, and they're almost always different. And the people think that there's some kind of like market manipulation going on or something like that, and it's just not the case. The reality is that float is a subjective number, right? If you take the shares outstanding, the float is basically how many shares are actually circulating in the market and available to be purchased or bought. So if you think about Facebook, for example, Facebook's got, let's just say, I don't know how many shares, it's got a bunch of shares out there, but Mark Zuckerberg owns a whole lot of shares. He could be 20 or 30%, and he's not selling. Okay, so it doesn't make sense to look at the whole shares outstanding for Facebook to calculate this stuff, because you want to subtract out the shares that Mark Zuckerberg has, and then you get the float. So basically you take shares outstanding and you subtract out all of the shares that are not in circulation. So these are things that are owned by insiders. These are companies, these are shares that are owned by strategic partners. Like if I have a corporate strategic investor that's not going to sell, then you would subtract those out. Now, if I have a hedge fund that's got a bunch of shares, then you wouldn't subtract those out, because they could sell. Some people argue that index funds should be subtracted out, because index funds are not going to sell. They have to buy or sell based on an index. So you could argue that, okay? But at the end of the day, everybody has a different methodology along these general rules. And so that's why you see different numbers for short interest over float. Short interest is not usually in kind of like question, because all the stock exchanges publish the same numbers, and there's official numbers. It's the float that looks different. So we went out and we went out and we licensed this data from Capital IQ, which was one of the top publishers of this data. And so that's why, and we're pretty excited about this. So we were very confident in our short interest over float. And so let's keep going here. The short squeeze score, I told you about this already. For BBIG, it's number 1. The short shares availability and the short borrow fee rates. This data is published by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers is one of the largest, one of the leading, I shouldn't say large, one of the leading hedge funds, leading brokers in the United States. They have a large, I think it's probably considered one of the top 10 actually. They have a large number of hedge funds. They have a large number of individuals. They have a large number of wealth managers. They have a large cross-section of clients in the United States. So they publish every few minutes the total number of shares that are available to be borrowed for each company at Interactive Brokers. Now, this doesn't mean that there are 0 shares available to be borrowed in the entire world, because that's not the case. This is the number of shares available to be borrowed at Interactive Brokers. So, but they also publish the borrow fee rates. And the borrow fee rates basically are the interest rates. We talked about them already once before, the interest rates that people have to pay in order to be able to borrow shares. And when a company is not, there are no shares available to be borrowed, then there's no interest rate because you can't borrow them, which is why there's an NA here. But so you can see what it was. This is updated every 30 minutes. We put the last update right here, but it hasn't changed. We put the time of the last change in here. Okay. A lot of people think that it hasn't been updated in 13 hours, but it has been updated. It's been updated 22 minutes ago, just hasn't changed in 13 hours. Okay. Okay. Let's keep going. And this page is basically in order of frequency of updates. So the short shares availability, the short squeeze score changes every time the borrow fee rate changes. So this changes regularly. Availability changes every 30 minutes. The short sale volume comes in on a daily basis. And basically this is the total number of shares that are sold short on any given day. And there's a lot of sources for this, right? You think about all of the trading venues that are in America. You've got the NASDAQ, you've got the New York Stock Exchange, you've got the CBOE. Each of these companies has 3 or 4 venues within them, right? The NASDAQ has, I think, 4, the New York Stock Exchange has 4, the CBOE has 4. And then you have all the off-exchange venues. So these are basically the dark pools that you hear about, okay? So you have to think about the fact that we're looking at these numbers and we don't have, very few people actually have a complete picture. We're in the process of licensing all the data, but we're looking at all the data that's available that we can. FINRA publishes short volume and short volume, total volume from their services, from their kind of listening stations. And we capture that and we give it to you, I think, for free, basically on the website. So this is the FINRA, also known as dark pool short volume, okay? 88 million shares on sold short out of 151 million shares sold short on those dark pool venues, gives a short volume ratio of 58%. Now, what does that mean? Well, it turns out market makers can sell short in order to complete a transaction. It's not necessarily a directional bet, though, whenever they do that. So a lot of this data is kind of watered down. Certainly, there was 88 million shares sold short, but if I go out and I tell somebody that I want to buy shares of BBIG, a market maker could sell me those shares without owning them and then go out and buy them later on. Well, that's a short sale that the market maker has done. Okay. So even though I'm betting long, it's registered as a short sale. So the usefulness of this is somewhat limited, to be honest, okay? Because we don't have a way to pull market maker trades out of here yet. Now, I mean, we do, and I'll get to that, but looking at these raw numbers is can be a little bit confusing, a little bit deceiving. So besides the FINRA data that we have, and this data is published widely, we also have this column here. FINRA short volume is the same as this column here. We have CBOE short volume, We have PSX and BX, which comes from NASDAQ. And then what we do is we take these three columns here, we add them to the combined total volume, and then we get the combined short volume ratio, so 59%. So we're going to be adding NASDAQ data here and New York Stock Exchange data here. And it'll be in this column and this column. There'll be another column in here. That's going to cost us money that we have to pay for, which is why some of this stuff is paywalled. But we're going to be adding that to provide a full picture of the combined short volume ratio. And the idea here is that we're trying to get the broadest sample, right? This is a sample of the dark pools. This is a sample of some of NASDAQ's venues. And then, of course, we'll add New York Stock Exchange, okay? So fails to deliver. So if I'm a fails to deliver basically is a metric that shows you how many stocks were attempted to be bought, but were not delivered for a variety of reasons, or sold short, okay, because, for a particular stock. And this is basically a metric of, some people say it's a metric of short selling. If I sell short and then I'm unable to borrow it later on to fulfill that, then it's considered a fails to deliver. And unfortunately, this is kind of backward looking. They don't release this on a timely basis. This comes from the SEC. It's lagged. So they'll publish 2 weeks of data on a daily basis, but it'll be lagged by about 2 weeks. So you can see here, we're kind of like 2 weeks lagged here. And so it's kind of backwards looking, right? We can look backwards, we can see that there's been a lot of failures to deliver, but it doesn't tell us enough about the future, unfortunately. It tells us that there's a lot of possible naked shorting in this, or some deficient market making, perhaps. Maybe it's not market manipulation. Maybe it's just, market makers are trying to fulfill orders and they're failing. Is that malicious? Maybe it's just part of what happens in the markets. Okay. And maybe it's not somebody, I don't know the answer to that. People argue both sides of this, but a lot of this stuff is just considered to be standard market activity that's got where things break down. Okay. And maybe that's one way to look at this, but it's not very useful to us looking forward for short squeezes, which is why it's not part of the score. We put it here for completeness. One thing that is interesting to me is we go back to that page that we saw where we saw ownership data, and we look at the institutional put call ratios. We're looking at sentiment here, and that's what this is. Okay, the put call ratios doesn't change every day. It changes whenever we have new filings, and so we've put it here. But I think this is interesting because it tells us the sentiment. Okay, this would suggest if it's a 0.18, a high call ratio, more calls than puts because it's below, which would be a bullish sentiment. Okay, so then we get down here to kind of the meat of this stuff. We look at short interest on a daily update. Now, we don't get short interest on a daily basis. We get it on a twice monthly basis. But there are things that are dependent upon short interest that change on a daily basis. So for example, the days to cover. We also track shares outstanding and float. Now, shares outstanding does not change every day, but float, we get updates every day. If a CEO of a company goes out and sells 10 million shares, then that's going to affect the float, and that might happen on any given day. Okay, so we have daily updates of this information. Now, we changed providers, as I mentioned to you the other day, Capital IQ, and you can see that our float went from 6 to 42. I trust the newer versions of this more so than the older versions of this. So here's the shares outstanding and float data after August 25th, provided by Capital IQ. And then we have the official NASDAQ data for short interest, and this is basically straight out of their data feed. If it's a New York Stock Exchange listed company, we'll have the official NYSE data, or we might have the official SIBO data. But basically, the settlement date, the publication date, which is usually a week and a half after the settlement date, the actual short interest, the change, their published days to cover. So they published this. This is not what we calculated. This is what so I don't know what kind of volume average look back they're using. And then our float, NASDAQ and NYSE don't publish float that's I consider to be current. So we're using the float that we have for that day here. And then ultimately the short interest overfloat. So obviously this is wrong here. This is the old float 6.41 was suspect, so I wouldn't use it. That's why we're using the new one. So the short interest overfloat here is 27.2% as of today. Okay, questions so far? Okay, I'll keep going. We also have funds disclosing short positions. This is the same table that we've seen elsewhere. We've got puts and we've got borrowed shares here. Okay, so that's the end of this kind of short interest page. Any questions about this? I'm going to move on here. Was it helpful? Can you give me some feedback here? Let me know if it's helpful or not. If it was informative. Okay. Okay. So let's just keep going then. In addition to the short squeeze explorer, what else do we have here? We have a short squeeze explorer for Australia if you're interested in Australian companies. We have an ownership explorer, which basically tells you, we look at number of owners in a security, and we look at the change in owners from this quarter to last quarter. We look at the allocation, the average allocation from last quarter to this quarter, and the change, and that gives us an ownership accumulation score, basically. So these companies here, if you're looking for ideas, if you're looking for investment ideas, these companies here are the companies that are being most heavily accumulated by institutions right now. Okay, we update this every day. So this is a really great opportunity for you to look in here. Like Zim Integrated Shipping Services went from 53 owners to 129 owners in a quarter. Okay. The allocation change was 1,000% for the owners, for these, for the people that own it. So I think it's a really interesting way to look at this. If you're looking, especially if you're looking for ideas. Okay. All right. So let's keep going here. What else do we have here in the screens? We have the big shorts. This is the largest short positions that we have on file. So Aris Management has a 22 million. I'll have to take a look at that. This goes back to the fact that we have issues in 13Fs where people sometimes overstate their values. But this is 22 billion is what this is probably saying. Short position in XLE. And then we've got some other big shorts here. People shorting SPY, QQQ, a lot of people shorting Tesla. These are all the same company, just listed. So Jane Street Group has got a big short position in Tesla, and so forth and so on. Okay. A lot of people shorting Tesla. I'm gonna have to look into this and see why it's showing all of the other listed instead of just the primary. What else do we have? We have insider buying. So if you look at insiders, a corporate insider is basically somebody who is an officer of a company. They're a board member of a company, or they are a 10% owner of a company. And the SEC says that these people are allowed to trade shares in their own companies as long as they're not making trades based on material, non-public information. And so what that means is that if a VP or an officer knows, for example, that they are about to announce earnings for the quarter, and that the earnings are poor compared to analyst expectations, that officer is not allowed to sell shares because that would be, he or she would be in possession of material, non-public information. However, if an officer thinks that is not in possession of material non-public information. Maybe they think that the industry is doing well or is going to do well based on just a general knowledge or the company is going to do well based on a bunch of initiatives that they've got going on. They are certainly allowed to buy shares as long as they do not have material non-public information. So as it turns out, there are a lot of academic studies that show that insiders tend to outperform the market when they're buying their own shares. And so let's take a look at the insiders and see who's buying and see who's selling. Selling is not as meaningful because people sell all the time. People sell because they want to buy a house, they get a divorce, they want to buy a boat, all kinds of reasons to sell. But if they're taking their own money and they're purchasing shares of their own company on the open market, then that is very significant. And that's what we look at here. So this is a work in progress, but basically we have a list of companies here and we look at the last 90 days. And in this case, we have, and we sort by, we have a factor, we have another scoring model here. We look at the number of buyers. So in this case, 4 insiders were buying in the last 90 days. We look at the net dollar volume being bought. Okay, I'm not sure why these are zeros. I'm not sure why this is zeros, but this should be non-zero. And we sort this, okay, to find the average accumulator score. We also look at officers. As I mentioned to you before, this is completely blank now. I'm so sorry about this. We've been doing some work on this, and obviously I botched it up. But basically, I'll tell you what it is. Insiders, as I mentioned to you, are officers, they're board members, or they're 10% owners. Well, if you look at 10% owners, most of the time, they're funds. Okay, so they are other people's money. Okay, board members also tend to be partners in those funds. Okay, so you get kind of a watered view because they're managing other people's monies. But officers are individuals who are employees of the company. As a general rule, they are not investing other people's money. They're spending their own money. And so on this officer buying list, once it comes back to life, what you'll find is that we've tried to narrow down all of the insiders and look at just the officers and look at how many of these officers are buying and how much of their own money they're putting on the line to see kind of like who's, a really pure form of officer buying. Okay. And then we look at like what they bought, what did they pay for those shares? And like, what is the current share price? So if they paid $5 a share and they spent a lot of money on that's $5 a share, and the share price of the company is $4 a share, then that means that their shares are underwater. That means they're probably going to work really hard to get those shares back above water. Okay. And that's what we look at here. Okay. So come back here. This is probably one of the most important screens that we have, although it doesn't get a lot of traffic, unfortunately. We can also look at insiders, profitable insiders. So we got 17 minutes left or 15 minutes left. Every one of these insiders that we track, okay, let's take a look at Terrence McGill Tierney. I don't know who he is, but let's take a look at what he's doing here. Every trade that an insider makes gets published, okay? This session is being recorded. It's going to go up on YouTube as soon as we're done. Every trade that somebody makes is recorded in a Form 4 filing. So you can see here that this person has made a bunch of trades. And in this case, he paid 100, he bought 100 shares. These are purchases. He paid 14 cents for these shares. We do look at stock splits. So basically what happened is that the share price, he bought a bunch of shares, not a whole lot of money, but 100 shares, 1,000 shares here and there. But the share price went up to $1 and he made, some pretty good returns. So this is a kind of a fun example here where this guy's bought some penny stocks and it's actually turned out really well for him. So if this guy buys more shares, this is best back in 2020, you might think that this is a good deal, right? He does a pretty good job of beating the market. You can also look at let's just take a look at some other people here. Steven Spurlock. The point of this is that, you know, if you take the entire population of insiders that are buying and selling, some of them are going to be doing well, and some of them are not. Okay, some of them are actively trying to make a profit in these shares, and what we're doing here is we're trying to identify who those profitable insiders are, and track them and follow them, and then follow their trades. That's the idea here. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've done. Let me get back here to. We did the short squeeze explorer. We did. Okay, let's go back to Vinco Ventures. We did the overview. We did the chart. We did the owners. We did the insiders here. This is the insider trades for Vinco Ventures. Here's the track records, okay, of these insiders. We've done the short interest. We also have SEC filings. So you can see all the SEC filings for companies here. The 8Ks, the 10Qs. Somebody's asking me to analyze Clover. I can't do it right now. We're almost out of time. We've got 10 minutes left. And then we've got this investor relations, which is not as important, I think. But basically what we do is we look at all the companies that have got positions, and we look at the ones that are most likely to invest in this company based on their existing portfolio. So this, it's 11:50 in my time zone. We've got 10 minutes left. Who has a question that I can answer that I have not answered already? If I don't have any questions, then I'll go ahead and close it up and I'll let you guys go. But I hope you guys got a sense of all the data that we have here. And, you know, and if you're interested in stock screening, by the way, we're going to do another one of these in 1 week exactly. And I'll talk to you about the new stock screener, the old stock screener, and the new stock screener, basically the workbench, which basically allows us to create really complex expressions. Basically, it's almost like, you know, SQL query. You know, it's got a query language here that allows us to analyze and segment the financial markets pretty easily. Okay, so here it is at work. Okay, questions? No more questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been really enjoyable. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope this was useful to you. And I will be taking this session, and I will be encoding it and putting it up on YouTube basically by the end of the day. So, you know, you can basically if you go to YouTube, do a search for Fintel webinars, and you'll see all the old webinars, and then you'll see this one ultimately as well. Okay. So thanks again. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you found it useful. And if you're interested in the stock screener, I'll be here again in a week. All right. Take care, everybody.